So now we're looking at Chapter 6, Plantation Owners of Longest Memory. And this chapter is from the perspective of Mr. Whitechapel. And it's written in the second person, that is you. Okay, you are split in two, see down here. So remembering from studies we've done in the past of other texts, the second person is used to powerfully put the reader into the position of that character. It's in the second person, but when he's talking to himself, he's using the first person, and that's in italics. So I leave my plantation to face the ridicule of my peers. You can see the opening line. And so basically in this chapter, Mr. Whitechapel is leaving the plantation after the death of Chapel. So he's got back, he's had those two conversations with Mr. Sanders and with Whitechapel, and now he's going out and facing his peers. So that's his fellow plantation owners. And he's filled with a deep sense of shame. And he's seeking to remove his shame and restore his reputation. And we'll see throughout the chapter how he does that. So he knows he's going to be ridiculed and mocked. And that's because in the eyes of his peers, he has quite lenient views on slavery. And the other plantation owners will mock him for his views and also the death that's happened on his property, despite his views, I guess. So in the beginning, on the first page, he's preparing himself for that, the derision, that's the mocking. And I did notice here that he's heading to the club that his father and friends helped build. And I just noticed that generational impact of slavery. Both the slaves, which is seen in Whitechapel, and the children and children's children and even great-grandchildren. And here, the owners of the slaves, the plantation owners, are also generational. And he's heading to his gentleman's club or his country club. He's boosting himself up by, I am a Whitechapel here. And knowing that he's going to be mocked by these lions, not men, he's giving himself courage before he goes in. And then he comes face to face with them. And the first thing that happens when he enters the room is there's this cheering. They're doing hip hip hooray. They're congratulating him. Basically, the symbolism of that is the fact that they are cheering death. They are happy about this slave dying. They're celebrating this cruel punishment resulting in a death. And it reinforces the horror of the views of slavery at the time. And he knows he's being whipped by their he knows he's being mocked by the congratulations, and he's defending himself. It was just a lesson that went wrong. And the other plantation owners say that it's a long overdue lesson. They see him as soft and that he should have punished slaves like that long ago. And here, Mr. Whitechapel defends himself, saying the death of one slave, just because this happened to one slave, doesn't mean that I'm like you. So the rest of you think that it's okay to beat slaves. I don't think that. And they say it makes you a fool and a hypocrite. And they're mocking his views. They think that his way of running the plantation and his way of running the slaves is wrong. And so for a couple of pages here, there's dialogue between Mr. Whitechapel and his peers. And for the first time, we really realise the type of peer pressure that Mr. Whitechapel experiences by being the only one in his peer group with his particular view. And the modern reader will see his view as harsh, but at the time, his view was considered lenient or soft. And so if you read these pages, 68, 69, 70, 71, there's a lot of dialogue. And we hear the voices of the plantation owners who represent the dominant view in the South of slavery at the time. So you'll see, for example, Mr. Whitechapel defending himself, saying, I treat my slaves with humanity, and they're saying you should have given them cruelty. They're trying to taunt him into admitting he felt alive as the boy was killed. They say, Mr. Whitechapel, you've acted superior, you've been vain. So they're just attacking him and his views. They accuse him of being an abolitionist, which is somebody who wants to abolish slavery. And at the time, they're saying, string him up, which is he deserves to be executed. And again, the view of being a Christian and the irony and hypocrisy of that view of Christianity going hand in hand with slavery is there as well. They accuse Mr. Whitechapel of treating the Africans better than white Christian brothers, which is perhaps one of the views of slavery at the time. They call Mr. Whitechapel's ways erroneous. And Mr. Whitechapel himself goes into some moments of shame and guilt and grief. He thinks that he used this policy of a judicious whip, judicious meaning just, okay, but there's no such thing as a just whipping. There's only one whip and it eats flesh. Remember, that's the personification we saw in the first opening chapter. And here Mr. Whitechapel says that the whip, he's saying that the whip is corrupt and it results in brother killing brother. Now there's symbolism here. Perhaps Diagua's symbolism is that we're all brothers in the human race. But at the time, obviously, this is referring to Sanders and Chapel, who were brothers. And he then starts to, or begins to recount how it happened and the fact he wasn't there, and gets caught up in some philosophical discussions about Christianity and slaves, again on page 73. And the view, our slave plantations put the pork on our plates. This idea that because we had slaves, we were able to provide for our families. And I guess there is a fear that without slavery, their businesses will go bankrupt. So what about to our children, our responsibility for our children? So if you have a look on this page, I think we're looking at 74. Should we free our stock? Now, this stock obviously means the slaves. So again, they're considered like property. But where will that leave our offspring? So there's a fear that without slavery, there will be economic ruin. And our children will be white slaves if we don't have slavery, black slaves. Mr. Whitechapel says there has to be another way to organise the economy, and they can't see it. And down here, they start talking about Whitechapel the slave. And what will happen if you free him? And what happens if you free him? Well, they'll try and make the plantation pay him for his 100 years of slave work, or his arrears. This is the things that he's owed. And I guess there's a connection here to the stolen generation and those views that the Indigenous people had their children stolen from them, and the government didn't want to apologise because they were afraid that if they did apologise and took responsibility, then people would sue them and they'd have to pay money. And this idea of, we can't say we're sorry, we can't accept responsibility, we can't change things just in case something then we have to pay for it with our finances as well, make up for it with our finances. At the top of page 75, you'll come to this idea of the defence of Whitechapel. And this is how, and Whitechapel here is the slave. And this is how Mr. Whitechapel restores his honour. He speaks highly of his slave Whitechapel, noble, honourable and true. He's living proof that our slaves are equal in every way. Back on page 76, he admits that Chapel and Mr. Sanders shared the same father. So he announces this news to all of his peers, this thing that he's kept hidden for so long. But he tells them because he's trying to prove Whitechapel's nobility. So he tells the story. Sanders Sr., well, he raped my slave's mistress. So the son, Chapel, was born from him. And they're now shocked. They're saying, unbelievable. We've not heard this. If it wasn't from your lips, we wouldn't believe it. And they then say, well, how can Whitechapel watch and not intervene? So how could your Whitechapel not step in? He lost a son in deference to authority. So he lost his son because he didn't disobey the order to keep that a secret. And they recognize that that Whitechapel, the slave, his loyalty is so strong that he didn't disobey his order, his master's order to keep it a secret. And now they're trying to buy Whitechapel. Name your price. That slave of yours is a slaver's dream. So they're trying to, the peers are trying to purchase Whitechapel. Mr. Whitechapel says he's not for sale. If he were white, he would still be rare. So he's got quality, nobility. And the other peers, plantation owners, now drink a toast to Whitechapel and his slaves. And they're toasting to him. Though Chapel is gone, there's still Whitechapel. Chapel's dead. The whip is buried, so never to be used again. And old Whitechapel is there, still loyal beyond requisition of duty. And it was like, by the other peers recognizing the loyalty of Whitechapel, they want to buy Whitechapel from him. He feels like, Mr. Whitechapel, he feels like his name is restored. He feels perhaps vindicated by his way of raising slaves. He feels like he's been able to earn the honor of his peers back. He's got the respect of the other plantation owners because of Whitechapel's. So he has the respect of the other plantation owners again because of Whitechapel's loyalty and obedience. He feels vindicated. So that's the end of chapter 6. Hopefully you've got some really good notes there that will help you with this chapter.